Hello, this video is for our parents of children in our Year 4 class, so Birch class this year. This is the first piece of information that we will give you about preparing your children for secondary school, and then there'll be more to come over the following years as they make their way through Key Stage 2 and primary with us. So it probably feels a bit early in their careers to be talking about secondary school, but actually it comes around quite quickly. We think it's really good to be organised. So we just start to give you some information at this point so that you can plan for what's coming up in the future. So a quick timeline for you of how things would work. In Year 4, we would start to talk to you in the summer term, which is now, about what things will look like for your child at secondary school and what you can do to get ready for that. So we'll run our information evening, which we're doing now, and putting it online for you, which is probably a better way of doing it anyway. And then from the parents' point of view, we would suggest that you start doing a little bit of research into some of your local options in terms of secondary school. And the reason that we suggest that you do that around this time of year is that in the autumn term, the secondary schools will run their open evenings, and it's a really good idea to go along to some while your children are in Year 5 rather than waiting until they're in Year 6. So this year it might look slightly different. You might find that some of those tours are virtual to begin with, and maybe there might be some face-to-face tours later in the year. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. But we suggest that you start researching this in Year 5, because if we skip ahead to the Year 6 slide, although the open days run all through September and October, actually you have to apply for your child's secondary school place in the October that they're in Year 6. So if that's the first time that you've been to the secondary schools, because you've actually got such a wide choice from here, what you might find is that that's quite a lot of information and quite overwhelming to take in all in one go. So what we suggest is that you start off in Year 5 by going along to have a look, and then by the time Year 6 comes round, you're basically just making your final decision from a short list. So have a look at the schools now. We're going to give you a little bit of information about your local options. Then autumn term in Year 5, start to go out to those open days and carry that on through the year as you might need to, depending on the current situation. What we will talk about at the end of the video is grammar schools, and for some of you, you might decide that you would like to look at grammar schools as an option for your child. Windsor and Maidenhead run a comprehensive system, so all of the schools accept all of the children. It's not ability grouped in any way, but you do have the option to go out of borough and look at grammar schools if that's something that you're interested in for your child. So if you'd like to do that, there's a few extra things that we'll talk about at the end of the video in terms of things that you would need to do and timescales. So in Year 6, in the autumn term, you would decide on your definitive list of schools for your children and make your application. And then they will write to you in the spring term with a school place offer so that the children know where they're going. Then through the summer term of Year 6, there would be a huge amount of transition work that happens at Braywick, and working with the secondary schools that your child are going to make sure that the children are ready and the school know all about your child before they start. So that'll be a very comprehensive process that we'll talk you through when the time comes. So you have got lots of options around here, which makes you very lucky, but also makes your job and of choosing maybe a little bit harder. So if you choose to stay in borough and go to one of the local secondary schools, you've got a number of choices there, and we'll give you a little bit of information about those in just a sec. You could also choose to go to out of borough and move into the grammar school system if you wish to do that. And here's a list here of your choices of schools. So Wycombe High, John Hampden, Beaconsfield High, Burnham Grammar, the Royal Grammar and Sir William Borlase are realistically your commutable choices. And some people after primary decide to move into the independent sector, and again these are the ones that are local enough to us, just giving you a list there so that you can look them up if that's of interest to you. Clares Court, Licensed Victuallers in Ascot, the Marist and St George's in Ascot. So what the main thing that's going to make your decision really is around how likely you are to get into the school, and it works in the same way at secondary as it does at primary, where they are going to do that based on your address. There's no feeder from your primary school, there's no preference of choices over that. So what you'll be able to find on the website, I know that this is too small to see, but if you Google RBWM admissions secondary 2020, then that will give you all of this information, and you would also be able to find that for out of borough schools. And what it will tell you is how many places each school had available each year, how many places were allocated, and under what criteria. So that will help you to understand how likely your child is to be able to get into a particular school, because just in the same way as primary, actually a lot of it comes down to which school you think is best for your child, but you also need to take into account whether or not you would actually be able to get in and offered a place should it be available. So it's always worth having a look at that information, and that will be different for each of you depending on your address. At grammar school, you'd be able to find the same information. So children do get into grammar schools from Windsor and Maidenhead, but some offer more places for people out of borough than others. And again, it will depend on where you live. So worth having a look at that and looking that up. So we'll just give you a really brief rundown on every school in Windsor and Maidenhead, and then there's loads of information available online, lots of things you'll be able to do in terms of joining tours and finding out about them, and we're here to offer as much advice as we can that might be helpful to you. So working through them in alphabetical order, Altwood would be your first choice. That is a mixed comprehensive, so boys and girls, one of the smallest schools in Windsor and Maidenhead for secondary, and was rated good by Ofsted in 2017. Cox Green is slightly bigger. They take 206 children into each year group, another mixed school that runs all the way through up and has a sixth form as well, and they were rated good in 2018. So we're really lucky in Windsor and Maidenhead because every secondary was at least good and some of them outstanding, which means you've got a great set of choices. Desborough College is the local boys' school. They take 189 boys into each year group. They run up until 16 just for boys, and then they have a co-ed for sixth form where they let girls in as well. And they've had an Ofsted since 2018. These are last year's slides, but they remain good. Newlands Girls' School would be your option if you were looking for single sex, and that they take 192 pupils each year all the way through to sixth form, and they were rated outstanding in 2018. Holyport College are a very small local school, but they have slightly increased their admissions number. I didn't change the slides from last year. There's slightly more places available, so it would be worth looking up how many children were successful in getting a place during this last round of allocations. They take children all the way up to sixth form as well. They were rated outstanding around the same time as us because we opened at the same time, and they are a mixed school as well. They also have boarding provision. Firs Platt take 223 pupils into every year group. They take boys and girls all the way through to sixth form. They were rated good in 2016. So as you can see, you've got a choice between mixed schools and single sex. A lot of the grammar schools, actually, if you were looking at that, tend to be single sex as well. One piece of advice I'd like to give you is not to rule any school out based on whether you think mixed or single sex might be better for your child, because actually we're so lucky around here that the schools offer a whole variety of different opportunities and experiences for the children, and even if you think that it might be better one way or the other in terms of whether they're mixed or not, actually you might find that other elements of the school outweigh that. So maybe try not to close your mind to not wanting single sex or definitely wanting single sex. It's definitely worth having a look at all of them. Okay, so a few tips for you for when you go to visit a secondary school. Mrs. Robertson and I put these together. We have done these ourselves as parents, so hopefully some of the information that we've got for you will be reasonably useful. So our first top tip would be consider whether or not you want to take your child with you. Now, when you go along to a secondary school open day, it's very different to a primary school open day. They do an amazing showcase for you, and of course they've got wonderful facilities in comparison to primary. So you'll be able to watch them blow things up in the chemistry lab, and they'll have the rowing machines out and the cricket nets and the trampolines, and they'll be cooking things in the home ec room, and there'll be wonderful things on display all around the school with their top students showing you absolutely their best face of what they've got. It's really exciting and very enticing, but it's easy to get caught up in that side of it. And actually what you might find if you take your children straight away is they get absolutely fixated on one very small thing that they saw on the day, that they're desperate to get on the trampolines, or that they really loved being able to dissect a heart in the biology lab or whatever, and actually they can't look at the wider picture. That would be your job really to do that. So because of that, what we would suggest is you have a look at the schools online first, you attend as many open days as you possibly can, and go without your children first, so that by the time you start talking to your children about this and taking them to visit the schools, you are taking them to the ones where you would be happy for them to attend any one of those schools. That's quite a good way of doing it, we think. So number 2, draw up a list of criteria. So it can be quite overwhelming when you go to look around because they're going to give you a huge amount of information. So it's worth having a think about what is going to be most important for you and your child before you get there. So it might be of interest to you about whether they are going to put the children in mixed ability groups or whether they're going to set them according to ability. You might want to know about how they give particular support for children who find the work hard. You might want to know how they're going to stretch and challenge children who maybe generally speaking are working at a higher level. It might be really interesting to you about what their homework policy is and how much of that they expect. You might be interested in their provision for a particular subject that your child is interested in, sport or drama or something like that. You might want to know about the type of homework that they're going to give you. Their pastoral support might be really important to you. These are all the kinds of things that we would suggest that you have a think about and kind of try to prioritise, so that when you go round the schools, you're making sure that you're having answers to those questions. So, which brings me on to number 3, make notes after each visit. So when you're going round, you'll be soaking it up and you'll think that you'll remember, but it's a bit like buying houses, that you, by the time you've seen a few, you'll try to remember back to each individual one, and they'll all blur into one because you'll get so much information. So it is really worth, if you can, making some notes after your visit about some of the things that you particularly enjoyed about it, or some of the things that you perhaps weren't so sure about, because that will help you to be able to make a really good comparison at the end. Personally, I made all that into a spreadsheet, but you might not be quite as sad as I am. Okay, so number 4, listen to the head teacher's speech. So during these open evenings, they will timetable throughout the evening times where the head teacher will speak, and it will happen more than once. And normally during the same set of speeches, other people will speak as well. So they normally have some year 7s talking about their experiences. The head boy and girl often speak, maybe the head of year 7, perhaps the chair of governors. And it's a really good way of finding out lots of information really about what that school is about and what they stand for. It's really important to go and have a look around the school as well. You'll normally be showed around by students, and of course they wheel out for you their most impressive and articulate children to be able to do that. But your tour will vary, and the information that you are given will be somewhat dictated to by the luck of the draw of the person who shows you around on the night. So all of that information is very valid, but it's worth balancing that with information from the leadership team at the school as well, because that will give you a much clearer idea of what they're striving for, what things they feel are most important, and what they'll do to support your child when you join. So number 5, visit the shortlist during the school day if you can. So get down to the point where, you know, you've maybe got a top 2 or 3 choices. Same as primary, you should really fill up all of your choices just to be on the safe side, but certainly those ones that you particularly liked and stand a reasonably good chance of getting into, it is really worth visiting during the school day. So as I said, they will give you an amazing showcase when you go round to visit, but things can look quite different on a normal school day. So it's really worth going to see them during that opportunity as well, and kind of giving a bit of a point of comparison about what that looks like. So some of them will have open events during the school day, or sometimes you can make an appointment to go and do that separately, but that is really worth it because you soak up a bit of a different atmosphere about what the school is like on a day-to-day basis when you see things that way. I went to one secondary school tour during the day when we were shown around the school, but only to classrooms where the doors were open, and when we looked into the classrooms where the doors were closed, there was some quite tricky things going on. So you certainly pick up some extra things when you go during the school day that's really worth it. Okay, and number 6, ask questions of pupils and staff. So that is what they're there for. They're really good at it. They do it every year, and just like us, they really love talking to you about their school. So make sure that you've got a list of things that you would like to find out about, and ask loads and loads and loads of things to find out as much information as you possibly can. Really make use of that experience. So if you are interested in one of the Windsor and Maidenhead schools, that is the main information really that you're going to need. We suggest you go off and have a little Google of the schools, find out which ones you're most likely to get into and which ones you're interested in, start looking at those dates for open days. We are really happy to support you and give you as much information as we possibly can to help in your decision making if you think that would be useful. So please do drop us an email or come in and talk to us, and we'd happily run through that information with you and support as much as we can. If you might be interested in a grammar school place for your child, keep listening. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. Okay, so it's grammar schools. If your child has been working within the top sort of 20% of their class during the majority of primary and has often got 1s in their report, then you might want to consider a grammar school place for your child. You don't have to. The comprehensives locally take children from a broad range of abilities, and a lot of the children who would be capable of passing their 11 plus would still choose to go to a local comprehensive. However, you've also got the choice of grammar schools if that is something you would be interested in. So we're going to give you a little bit of information about that and what that might look like, so that you are fully informed about your decisions that you make for your children. So if we go back to the timelines, there's a few extra bits if you are looking at grammar schools for your child. So into year 5, we will run, or we will offer to run, if we get numbers that are high enough, some sessions for the children that will run as a breakfast club for children who we feel would be standing a good chance of passing that 11 plus. So it's an invitation only. You would tell us whether you would be interested in that, and we would tell you whether we think your child would be appropriate. And if we get 8 or more children who are all interested in those sessions, Mrs. Robertson and I will run those for you before school. That will not be enough to get them through the grammar school test. Although they say it's a test of ability and you can't revise for it, actually some of the ways that the tests are set out and the types of questions they ask mean that without familiarisation it's really hard to pass. So we will give some help and support towards that, but we would suggest that you look at other things to do as well. So whether you run test papers at home with your children and practice, or whether you use the whole wealth of tutors that are available, you'll probably need to do a little bit more than that as well. But at Braywick, we're committed that every year we will offer some familiarisation sessions throughout year 5. So they would start in the autumn term and they would run all the way through till summer. And then they will sit there 11 plus at the very beginning of year 6. So we will stop our sessions at the end of year 5, ready to start for the next year 5 the following year. So if you decide that you're going to do that, you need to sign your children up in the summer term. So you would need to have a look, find that information online about when you need to do that, because this is an opt-in. If you live in Bucks, all of the children automatically take the test. But if you don't, then you have to opt your child into that. And so you would have to register. And depending on which grammar schools you're interested in, you might need to register with more than one authority, because they can sit the Bucks County Council test and they can also sit the Slough test, and you can put them in for both if you choose to do that. So you need to be doing that by the summer of year 5. Then in year 6, very early on in September, they would take those secondary transfer tests. And then you will have the results back of that before you have to make your school applications. So that's great, because it means that you know before you are choosing schools whether or not you can apply for grammar schools for your child. If your child doesn't pass, you do have the option to appeal, and you could come and talk to us about that and how we could support you with it. That makes your application process slightly more difficult, but if you fall into that category, we'll worry about that a bit nearer the time. Okay, so that's how your timeline would vary slightly. I want to give you a little bit of information about these tests. So if you come along to an open evening, we were able to run an information evening for you, we'd have shown you some of these tests. Obviously I can't do that just now, but if you're interested in having a look at them, we have got some at school, so you can pop in and have a flick through or borrow them if you would like to. So the children will sit 2 papers. In the first paper is verbal reasoning, comprehension and spelling, punctuation and grammar. And in the second paper is maths and non-verbal reasoning. So in terms of the English and maths, generally speaking, all of the things that we cover at school are exactly the right things that will come up in those tests, but they do more or less test against the year 6 syllabus, and the children will only just be joining year 6, so they will need to have been working at that exceeding level and being exposed to some maths and English beyond what they would have been taught at school. In addition to that, they do the verbal and non-verbal reasoning, which are completely unlike anything they will ever have otherwise seen, and that is the way that they test the children's intelligence. So the idea is that it is just a test of intelligence, but actually, because the tests are quite similar each time and the same types of questions come up, it's a really good idea to have given the children lots of practice and experience of those before the test happens, because otherwise they're just so unusual that they'll really struggle with that. So if they come to our familiarisation sessions, we would alternate the weeks. One week, Mrs. Robertson, in fact I think I'm going to do this side, I would do verbal reasoning, comp and spag, mainly because I cannot do non-verbal reasoning, it's far too hard for me, and then Mrs. Robertson would do maths and non-verbal on the opposite week, so that across the year they would get some familiarisation of that. But there's loads of other ways of doing it. You can buy test papers to practice at home, and there's a wealth of tutoring agencies offering that outside of school as well. So they would sit their test in early September, and normally that takes place at a grammar school, and you either take them out of school on a school day or sometimes it's on a Saturday. There's a different test for each local authority, so you do need to have had a look at those schools and decided whether you just want the Bucks test because you like those schools, or whether you also like the Slough schools and you might want to sit them through 2 different types of test. The tests are very similar, but they're different, but you have to do the different ones for different local authorities, but it's the same type of test that the children would do. And then what they do is they standardise their scores. So they take all of the tests, they mark them all up, and then they do a calculation based on a few things like their age might make a slight difference and things like that. And then that will give them a number which would be their score overall. It's been 121 forever that they need in order to pass. So it was 121 when I was at school. I don't think it's really ever changed. So by the time they've added all of these scores together, they'll end up with this standardised score, and the pass mark is 121. So the results are published, as we said, before their secondary school application window, so you know whether or not to apply for grammar schools and whether or not it's worth an appeal, because if you won't really, appeals will only be successful if you're only a couple of marks off the 121. So we think it's worth just sharing with you some pros and cons of grammar school, just to really help you to make an informed choice. So pros. Grammar schools have the top 10% of all pupils, which means that your child would be in an environment with some of the highest achieving children who live locally. They get really high exam results, so this comprehensives do as well, but you are possibly more likely, possibly not, but generally speaking their results are higher in the grammar schools. So for their GCSEs and their A levels, they tend to get really good grades for the children. They have a very highly academic culture. Now actually that comes on to both pros and cons, I think, because if your child is highly academic and really thrives in that environment, then you might think that that's a really great opportunity and experience for them. But actually, if that's not the case for your child, then maybe it's not quite the right thing. And of course, it gives you a much wider choice of schools, because as well as all of the Windsor and Maidenhead schools to look at, it then opens up, if they pass, a whole load of other opportunities as well for them. So there are definitely positives of sending them to a grammar school, but there are a few other things that we would like you to consider as well. So the first thing is distance. It's worth thinking about this for all schools, wherever your child is going to be going, about actually how they're going to get there and how long their journey is going to be. So a lot of the schools do run buses. That would be at a cost to you, but depending on how far away they are and the routes and things, you'd often find, particularly for the grammar schools, because they're further away, your child might be getting on a bus at 7:30 in the morning and not returning home until 4:30 at night. It'll be dark in the winter, it's a long day. So just something to consider really. It might not be an issue to you, but actually you might decide that that isn't the right thing for you and your child. It's a very high pressured environment. They do put a lot of pressure on the children at secondary schools, at grammars. They tend to be very academically competitive. So it's just thinking about whether that is an environment that is going to be a positive thing for your child or not, and that will absolutely be down to the individual. They're selective, of course, so what you're looking at here is a pass or fail, and it's worth thinking about the impact that that might have on your child. Of course, if they pass, that's a wonderful thing, but just thinking about what happens if they're not successful and how they might manage that and how you might manage that with them. So just a few things to consider, and just to run through with you what we will do to support you and your child through this process. So when they come to school every day, we will give them the same outstanding teaching that we will have done all the way through primary, and all of that maths and English that we teach them and everything else, of course, will be really relevant to getting them ready for secondary school. We will provide as much support and advice to parents as we possibly can and as you need, so please do tap into that and use us. And then we will run this familiarisation provision. So if you think, having listened to all of this information, that it's something you're interested in, please send an email into school, and we can arrange a time to discuss with you whether we think your child would be a good candidate for this and whether we can take it forward. And if we have enough children interested, we're really happy to run those sessions for you. And then we will offer loads of support for you and your children, particularly when it comes to year 6. All kinds of lovely transition activities will happen, and we'll work in partnership with the secondary schools to get the children ready. So I hope that information has been helpful to you. Probably quite a lot to think about, but don't worry, we do this nice and early so that you've got plenty of time to start thinking and planning. And whenever you're ready, if there's anything else that we can help you with and any more that you would like to know, then please just come in and see us. Okay, thanks for listening.